It was a cold, moonless night in the small suburban town of Oak Ridge. The streets were still, with only the occasional rustle of leaves moving in the cool breeze. In one cozy little house on Maple Street, the Williams family was enjoying the warmth of a quiet evening. Inside, the house was filled with the soft hum of a television playing an old movie. Marissa Williams, the mother of two, sat on the couch, her legs tucked under a soft fleece blanket. She smiled as her daughter, Lucy, curled up beside her, her head resting on her mother's lap. Across the room, her husband, Greg, was flipping through a magazine, the low flicker of the TV light casting shadows on his face. "Mom, do you think we'll ever get a dog?" Lucy asked, her voice sleepy but curious. Marissa chuckled. "I think we'll see. It's a big responsibility. But maybe someday." Greg looked up from his magazine. "We can think about it when we move to a bigger house. We're not ready for one yet, but I think you'd be great with a dog." Lucy beamed, clearly excited by the idea. But little did they know, their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't possibly predict. In the back of the house, near the kitchen, a small but powerful presence lay peacefully on a dog bed by the door. His name was Max, a golden retriever mix who had been with the family since he was a pup. Max was gentle, loyal, and protective, qualities that had earned him a permanent place in the Williams family's hearts. Over the years, he had grown to be more than just a pet. He was a guardian, a companion, and, to the Williams family, he was a true member of the household. Max's ears perked up suddenly. His nose twitched. He had heard something that wasn't right. A soft scraping sound, almost imperceptible, came from the back door. He stood and padded quietly to the kitchen, where he sniffed the air and circled the door nervously. Marissa noticed Max's movement. "Max? What's wrong, boy?" she called softly. Max growled low in his throat, his body tense. He looked back at her with wide, alert eyes, then turned his attention back to the door. Greg set down his magazine. "What is it? Is there someone outside?" Max didn't respond, but his posture spoke volumes. The growl in his throat deepened, becoming more menacing. Marissa stood up and walked toward him, her heart beginning to race. "Max? What's going on?" Then, from outside, came the unmistakable sound of a door handle being jiggled. A sharp metallic click. Someone was trying to get in. Greg's eyes widened. "Marissa, call 911. Quickly." Max moved toward the back door, his body trembling with instinctual fear and aggression. He knew something was wrong, but he was ready to protect his family no matter the cost. As Marissa fumbled with her phone, dialing the emergency number, she glanced at Max. "Stay close, Max," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. But Max wasn't interested in staying close. He was already crouching near the door, the muscles in his legs coiled tightly, ready to spring into action. Before anyone could react further, the back door creaked open, just a sliver at first, and then it swung wide. A shadowy figure appeared in the doorway. A man, tall and dressed in dark clothing, stepped into the house, a glint of metal reflecting in his hand, a knife. The intruder froze when he saw Max. For a moment, the two locked eyes. The intruder, a stranger with wild eyes, and Max, a dog who had no idea what this man wanted but knew his only job was to protect. Without hesitation, Max lunged forward, his teeth bared, his body a blur of gold and muscle. The intruder didn't expect it. The knife swung wildly, slashing through the air, but Max was faster. His jaws clamped down on the man's wrist, and he howled in pain as the dog's powerful bite sank deep. But the intruder fought back, swinging the knife with one hand, the other still trapped in Max's grip. A savage struggle began, one that none of them could have anticipated. Max, though powerful and brave, was no match for the man's strength. They tumbled to the floor, the knife flashing in the dim light. Max kept his hold on the intruder's wrist, growling fiercely, refusing to let go. Marissa's heart pounded in her chest as she screamed, "Get out! Leave us alone." Greg rushed to the door to shield his family. Lucy was already shaking with fear, her little body clinging to her mother's side. But the fight was far from over. The intruder, desperate and furious, kicked Max off him. Max yelped as he was sent flying into the kitchen, his body crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. It was then that Max realized the full danger of the situation. He wasn't just fighting for his territory, he was fighting for the people he loved most in the world. Max lay on the cold kitchen floor, dazed and struggling to catch his breath. The impact had been hard, and his vision blurred for a moment as he tried to regain his bearings. Pain shot through his body, but his mind didn't focus on it. All he could think about was the danger that still loomed in the house. The intruder was still there, and he was getting closer. Marissa's voice trembled as she whispered to Greg, "We need to get out. Now." Greg, his face pale, nodded sharply. "I'll cover you. Stay behind me, get Lucy to the front. I'll try to slow him down." Max's ears perked up at the sound of their voices, but they were faint and distant in the haze of pain clouding his mind. He pushed through the dizziness and forced himself to stand. The intruder was still in the hallway, rummaging through drawers and cabinets, searching for something to take. He was getting closer. Max knew that this man wasn't just a thief, he was a threat to his family, and that was something he would never allow. The intruder paused, hearing the sound of the family trying to move to the front of the house. He looked over his shoulder, catching sight of Max, who was now limping toward him with a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. The intruder smirked, clearly thinking the dog was no threat anymore. "What's this? You want to play hero, mutt?" Max's tail wasn't wagging. He was focused. His body felt heavy, but the fire inside him burned brighter than the pain. He lunged at the man again, this time faster, angrier, and more determined than before. The man swung the knife in a wide arc, but Max was already out of range, his jaws snapping just inches from the intruder's legs. He moved like lightning, circling the man, forcing him to turn in circles, his eyes darting in panic. Max could smell the sweat on the man's forehead, could feel the raw fear emanating from him as he realized that this dog wasn't going to back down. "Leave, now," Greg shouted from the front of the house, his voice low but filled with authority. But the intruder wasn't going to leave. Not without what he came for. He took another step toward the kitchen, his eyes narrowing. With a sudden, vicious motion, the man lunged for Max. The knife slashed through the air again, grazing the dog's side. Max yelped, his body instinctively recoiling from the sharp sting. Blood began to seep from the wound, but Max didn't flinch. Instead, he growled deeper, louder, and more fiercely than ever. He couldn't give up, not now. He had one mission: protect his family. Max charged at the man again, this time faster than before, catching the intruder off guard. He grabbed the man's arm with his teeth, sinking in with all his strength. The intruder screamed in pain, dropping the knife, but the fight wasn't over. The man swung wildly, trying to break free, his other hand landing a heavy blow to Max's side. The dog stumbled but stayed on his feet, his eyes never leaving the intruder. Max's body was exhausted. His vision was starting to blur again, and the blood loss from his side was making him weaker with every passing second. But his instincts, his love for his family, kept him going. He couldn't let the intruder hurt them. With one final, desperate surge of strength, Max lunged forward one last time, clamping his jaws around the intruder's wrist and dragging him to the ground. The man screamed in fury, but it was too late. Max had him pinned, and there was no way he was escaping. Just then, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Marissa had managed to call 911 in the midst of the chaos, and help was on the way. The man's eyes darted around the room, knowing he didn't have much time left. But Max held on. Greg was already on the phone, shouting at the dispatcher, giving them the details they needed. He rushed to Max's side, reaching down to pull the injured dog off the intruder. "Good boy, Max, good boy," Greg whispered through the adrenaline and fear, his voice breaking as he gently stroked Max's fur. Max's head lolled to the side, his energy waning, but he still managed to wag his tail faintly. He had done it. He had protected them. The intruder, realizing he had no chance of escaping now, began to struggle in panic. But he was out of options. Within minutes, the police arrived, and the house was filled with flashing lights and the sound of officers taking control of the situation. The man was arrested, his weapon seized, and his fate sealed. The immediate danger was over, but for the Williams family, the relief was bittersweet. Max, bloodied and bruised, lay on the floor, his breathing shallow and labored. Greg knelt beside him, holding his hand to the dog's side as Marissa and Lucy stood at a distance, unsure of what to do. Is he going to be okay? Lucy asked, her voice cracking. Greg looked down at Max, his heart aching. I don't know, sweetheart. But he was so brave. He made sure we were safe. He did his job. But even as he said those words, there was a heavy truth in the air. Max had done more than just protect them. He had put himself in harm's way to save them all. And as much as Greg wanted to believe that everything would be okay, deep down, he knew that Max's sacrifice had come at a great cost. The night was a blur of flashing lights and the frantic whispers of paramedics and police officers. In the midst of all the chaos, Max lay on the kitchen floor, breathing shallowly, his golden fur matted with blood. The Williams family stood by helplessly, unable to do anything but watch, as the brave dog who had given everything to protect them fought for his life. Greg held Max's head gently in his lap, tears mingling with the sweat on his brow. The adrenaline that had surged through him earlier now left him feeling hollow, exhausted. Marissa stood by his side, her face pale, her hands trembling as she stroked Max's fur in a desperate attempt to comfort him. Lucy was silent, her small frame pressed against her mother's side, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She couldn't understand the magnitude of what had just happened, but she understood one thing: Max had saved them. And in her heart, she knew that this dog wasn't just a pet, he was family. As the paramedics worked, trying to stabilize Max, one of the officers approached Greg. We've got the intruder in custody. He's being taken to the station for questioning. It looks like he was after valuables, but we'll know more once we've got everything sorted out. Greg barely registered the words, too consumed with the sight of Max's still form in his lap. Thank you, he managed to say, his voice hoarse. The paramedics, recognizing the severity of Max's condition, didn't waste any time. They carefully lifted him onto a stretcher and began rushing him to the waiting ambulance. Marissa's heart skipped a beat as she caught a final glimpse of Max's tired eyes. He was still there, still holding on, but for how much longer? We're taking him to the animal hospital now, one of the paramedics said, looking at Greg and Marissa. He's in critical condition, but we'll do everything we can. The drive to the animal hospital was agonizingly long, even though it was only a few miles away. Marissa held onto Lucy, who had curled up tightly, her small arms wrapped around her mother's waist. Greg's hands were gripped tightly to the seat, his knuckles white, as his mind raced through every possible outcome. When they arrived, the staff at the hospital wasted no time in taking Max from the ambulance. Marissa and Greg were allowed to follow them inside, but they were quickly escorted to the waiting room. Time seemed to stretch on forever. I don't think I can stand here much longer, Marissa whispered, her voice breaking. Max has always been there for us. I can't imagine not having him. Greg's hand found hers, and he squeezed it tightly, offering her what little comfort he could. We've given him a chance, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He's not giving up, and neither are we. The hours dragged by. They were told that Max was stable, but his injuries were severe. He had taken a deep cut to his side, and although they had stopped the bleeding, the internal damage was still a concern. The doctors weren't sure if he would survive the night. But through it all, Max fought. He had fought for his family, and now, he was fighting for himself. Greg and Marissa stayed at the hospital, refusing to leave. Lucy, exhausted and still reeling from the events of the night, had fallen asleep in her mother's lap. It was only after the sun began to rise, painting the sky with soft pinks and oranges, that the door to the waiting room opened, and the doctor walked in. Max was awake. Barely, but he was alive. Mr. and Mrs. Williams? The doctor's voice was kind but serious. Max is a fighter, there's no doubt about that. But we need to be realistic. His injuries are severe, and we'll need to monitor him closely. I can't promise you anything, but he's stable for now. Tears welled up in Marissa's eyes as she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Can we see him? The doctor nodded. You can. He's awake, but he's very weak. You should be prepared for him to be tired and disoriented. They followed the doctor down the hall to the back of the hospital, where Max was resting in a quiet room. His body was covered in bandages, and he had an IV in one leg, but his eyes, his familiar, loyal eyes, met theirs as they entered. Max's tail gave a slow, weak wag. Oh, Max? Marissa whispered, her heart swelling with emotion as she knelt beside him. She gently stroked his head, feeling the warmth of his fur under her hand. "You're so brave. You've been so brave for us." Max's eyes softened, and despite his exhaustion, he gave a small, muffled bark, a sound that brought a tear to Greg's eye. He stepped forward and placed his hand on Max's back. "You're going to be okay, buddy. You hear that? You're gonna make it." Max gave another faint wag of his tail, his body tired but his spirit unbroken. The family remained by his side, offering him comfort as he had done for them countless times before. Days passed, and Max continued to fight. The road to recovery was slow, and there were many moments where it seemed like he might not pull through. But the Williams family never gave up on him, just as he had never given up on them. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, Max was well enough to come home. He still limped, and there were scars, both visible and hidden, but his spirit was as strong as ever. The day Max came home, Lucy ran to greet him first, throwing her arms around him as she whispered, "I knew you'd come back to us, Max. You're my hero." Greg and Marissa smiled through their tears, watching as Max, despite his wounds, stood tall and strong. He had done his job. He had protected them. And now, he had returned home, his family, whole again. Years went by, and while Max's body slowed with age, his heart never wavered. He remained the same loyal, protective companion to the Williams family, watching over them, as only a dog with the soul of a hero could. And though Max's life was cut short in the end, his legacy lived on forever. He wasn't just the dog that saved them, he was a symbol of love, loyalty, and the lengths one would go to for family. Max had given his all, and in return, the Williams family would forever be grateful. Max had fought for them. And in the end, he had won.